This week's Torah portion is one of the most familiar passages in the scripture. It's the beginning of the Passover story that we recount every year during the Seder celebration. And some of what you heard from Miriam should be familiar, and I'll expand a little bit on what's in the passage and then offer a few thoughts on a portion of it that seemed unusual to me. The story recounts that over many generations, the descendants of the 70 or so family members who joined Joseph in Egypt grow substantially in number until the land is filled with them. Then, as Miriam recounted, we're told that a new king arose over Egypt who knew not Joseph, which is one of the most beautiful ways of saying time passes in all of literature. Time passes, and the goodwill that existed between the Israelites and the Egyptians is replaced by hostility on the part of Pharaoh, who orders ruthless forced labor on the Israelites and sets Egyptian taskmasters over them, fearing that in a time of strife they will rise up and join the Pharaoh's enemies. They're enslaved by the Egyptians. But that's not enough. Even with the Israelites in bondage, Pharaoh still feels they might join a rebellion if his enemies were to attack. And to reduce this threat, he orders the Hebrew midwives to kill any male children born to Israelite women. The midwives who must carry out this decree find clever ways around it, so they are able to circumvent it. So Pharaoh broadens the edict, requiring that any Egyptian who encounters a newborn male Hebrew has to throw the baby into the river. This is the scene into which Moses is born, to Amram and Jochebed from the house of Levi. Jochebed nurses the baby secretly for 3 months and realizes that she can't continue to hide him. So she puts him in a wicker basket and floats it in the reeds near the edge of the Nile. And her daughter, Miriam, watches to see what will happen. Pharaoh's daughter, who is referred to later in the commentary as Batya, wanders by, discovers the child, and takes pity on it. Knowing the boy is a Hebrew, she takes it into her home and takes the baby out of the river. And Miriam, who was standing nearby watching, comes out, reveals herself, and offers to find a woman to nurse the child. This seems like a good solution. So Pharaoh's daughter pays a Hebrew woman, secret, it's his mother, Jochebed, to nurse the boy until he is weaned, and then bring him to the palace to live as her son, which she does and which he does. And that is all we know about the young Moses. Time passes. He becomes a man. Nothing is said about his upbringing. So we're left to kind of imagine what growing up in the house of the Pharaoh, being treated like his grandson, enjoying all the privileges of royalty must be like. We're not told this, but I assume Moses is well fed and educated and trained in whatever essential skills it is that a prince needs to know, introduced to the Egyptian gods, all of these sorts of things. But the story itself picks up when he's an adult, and he witnesses an injustice, an Egyptian overseer beating a Hebrew. And he is moved to correct this imbalance by slaying the Egyptian. Unfortunately, he's seen doing this, and is in fear of his life. He flees to his ancestral land, and we'll read next week about what happens to him there. And later in the Torah portion, it talks a bit about that. But what puzzles me about this portion is, how does this charade of Moses, Prince of Egypt, continue for 5 or 10 or 15 or even 20 years Moses is clearly not Pharaoh's grandson. He's not Batya's child. And everybody must know that. I mean, there are clues everywhere. Batya is not married, has no husband. Batya is never pregnant. Suddenly, she appears in public with a toddler, not even a baby, which is the usual order of things, to see the baby first. Batya and Pharaoh say it's her son, but everybody knows. So how does this all work? I mean, what is everybody thinking when they are pretending that something is other than what it is? It's kind of easy to imagine what the Pharaoh is thinking. Batya comes to him and says, "Please, Daddy, can I keep it?" And bats her eyes and cries, and he's thinking internally, all the Hebrew boys are supposed to die, and in fact, all the Egyptians are supposed to cast them into the Nile, but I love my daughter, so I will let her keep Moses. And if I let her keep Moses, then I guess I've got to let him live in the palace. And if I let him live in the palace, then I guess he gets all the privileges of royalty. In for a penny, in for a pound. That's kind of what Pharaoh might be thinking. But what are the people thinking? What are the Egyptians thinking? That's the part of the story that interests me this evening. The people are being told to pretend that Moses is part of the royal family, and they probably know he isn't. Why do they go along with this fiction? Why do we all engage in similar fantastic thinking, which defies what we know sometimes to be the truth? Well, they might do it out of respect. Respect for Pharaoh. Maybe he's been a kind ruler, brought prosperity. The boy seems to be important to him. So let's go along and we'll accept his definition of things. Or maybe out of respect for Batya. Maybe she was a champion of Egyptian women, or she endowed a school, or something that earned the people's respect. These kinds of rationalizations are familiar to me, and I suspect are familiar to you as well. We sometimes defer to the rosy picture painted by elected officials, business leaders, family elders, because one way or another they've earned our respect. There's no harm in a little white lie if it's important to someone we really revere. Alternatively, and maybe more likely, the Egyptians might follow Pharaoh's lead and accept Moses as royalty out of fear.
Yep.
After all, Pharaoh is powerful. He holds the Hebrews in bondage. He might easily do the same to the Egyptians if they defy him. It would not take many kids being punished severely for stealing Moses' lunch, or being expelled from hieroglyphic school for copying Moses' homework, for the word to get out that you don't want to defy Pharaoh when it comes to his grandson. So suddenly everybody is Prince Moses this, and Prince Moses that. And because the price of not accepting the fantasy is too high. You don't have to rack your brains to come up with contemporary examples of state-endorsed fallacies that become facts on the basis of fear. Think about authoritarian regimes in our lifetime in the last century, and you can come up with plenty of examples. But there's a third reason that people might adopt a position that they know to be incorrect, and it's captured in the phrase, you gotta go along to get along. Essentially, people act in ways they see other people acting, so they are perceived as being part of the group, not in opposition to it, not an outsider. There's no explicit threat. There's no deference out of duty or respect. Instead, we want to be seen as part of the crowd. We dress like other people dress. We accept lies when we see other people accepting them. I think Moses is way cooler than Ramses. I do too. So everyone in the family knows that Uncle Aaron drinks too much, but nobody talks about it or intervenes. And I'm sure you can think of plenty of examples from your own life where we let the majority opinion move us away from our own convictions. We find it difficult to be in opposition to the mainstream. And I think that what's hidden in tonight's Torah portion is a lesson. It's important to challenge ourselves to be true to our own beliefs, to not compromise our values, to speak up when we believe that Pharaoh has no clothes. Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.